My name is Rachel Morgan, and I learned early that love in my family came with conditions I could never meet. To keep listening to this beautiful and special story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Write your name and the city you're watching from so I can include a special greeting for you in an upcoming story. I was 28 when Grandpa William died, sitting in that same leather chair where he'd told me bedtime stories as a child. The stories stopped when I turned 12 and announced I wanted to join the military someday. Girls like you, he'd said quietly, should think about more traditional paths. But his eyes were kind when he said it, not cold like the rest of the families became. The funeral was everything you'd expect from the Morgans: proper, expensive, and emotionally distant. My cousin Madison stood at the front in her black Chanel dress, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She'd always been the golden child, the one who married the right man, lived in the right neighborhood, said the right things at Sunday dinner. I wore my navy dress uniform, not because I wanted to make a statement, but because it was the nicest thing I owned that seemed appropriate. The looks I got told me everything I needed to know about how welcome I was. "Rachel's here," my aunt whispered to someone behind me, as if my presence was an inconvenience they hadn't planned for. After the service, we gathered at Grandpa's house, the same Victorian mansion where I'd spent summers until I graduated high school and chose the military over college. The house smelled like old books and lavender, just like it always had. But now it felt hollow, like all the warmth had left with him. That's when I first noticed Madison wearing Grandma Catherine's pearls. Those pearls had been Grandma's most treasured possession. She'd worn them every Sunday to church, every Christmas dinner, every family gathering that mattered. I remembered sitting on her bed as a little girl, watching her clasp them around her neck in the mirror. "Someday," she'd told me once, "these will go to someone who understands their meaning." But there was Madison, touching them absent-mindedly as she accepted condolences, as if they'd always belonged to her. I said nothing. I've learned that in my family, silence is often the safest response. Chapter 2. She arrived with words that burn. The will reading was scheduled for the following Tuesday at Morrison & Associates, the law firm that had handled the Morgan family affairs for 3 generations. I almost didn't go. What was the point? I'd been the black sheep for so long I couldn't remember what it felt like to belong. But something pulled me there. Maybe it was the way Grandpa had looked at me during our last conversation, when I'd visited him just a month before he died. He'd seemed like he wanted to tell me something important, but kept stopping himself. "Rachel," he'd said, reaching for my hand with fingers that trembled slightly, "you've always been stronger than the rest of them now." I thought about those words as I sat in the waiting room, watching my family file in one by one. Uncle Richard in his expensive suit, Aunt Patricia clutching her designer purse like a shield, Madison and her husband Brad looking like they owned the place already. Mr. Morrison was a tall, thin man with silver hair and the kind of gentle manner that probably served him well in these situations. He cleared his throat and began reading in that formal legal tone that makes everything sound final. Most of the will was exactly what I'd expect. The house went to Uncle Richard, the largest share of investments to Aunt Patricia, smaller portions to various cousins and distant relatives. Madison received Grandma's jewelry collection, which explained the pearls. My name wasn't mentioned until the very end. To my granddaughter Rachel Morgan, Mr. Morrison read, "I leave my collection of military history books and the sum of $5,000, with the hope that she continues to serve with honor." $5,000 and some dusty book. I could hear the unspoken message: "This is what happens when you disappoint us." Madison turned to look at me, and I saw something in her eyes I couldn't quite identify. Pity, maybe, or relief that she'd gotten everything that mattered. "I'm sorry, Rachel," she said later, as we stood outside the law office, but her fingers were still playing with those pearls, and her words felt rehearsed. I nodded and walked away. What else was there to say? Chapter 3. I was there but invisible. The next few weeks passed in a strange haze. I went back to my small apartment across town, back to my routine at the base, back to pretending that being cut out of my family's legacy didn't matter. But it did matter, more than I wanted to admit. I found myself driving past Grandpa's house sometimes on my way home from work. The sold sign went up faster than I'd expected. Uncle Richard wasted no time making arrangements, as if he couldn't wait to turn our family's history into cash. I was driving by one evening when I saw Madison's car in the driveway. Curiosity got the better of me, and I parked across the street to watch. Through the front windows I could see her moving through the rooms with boxes, packing up the last of Grandpa's personal belongings. She emerged 20 minutes later carrying a small wooden box that I recognized immediately. Grandpa's memory box where he kept old photographs and letters from his time in World War II. He used to show me those photographs when I was little, telling me stories about courage and sacrifice that first made me want to serve my country. Madison loaded the box into her car without ceremony, like it was just another item to be sorted and stored. I wanted to knock on her window to ask what she planned to do with those memories that meant so much to our grandfather, but I stayed in my car, watching her drive away with pieces of our family's history. That night I called the only person I trusted to understand, my old college roommate Sarah, who now worked as a paralegal in Columbus. Something doesn't feel right about this whole thing, I told her. It's not about the money or the house, it's about the way they looked at me, like I was some stranger who'd wandered into the wrong funeral. Did you ever think about getting a second opinion? Sarah asked. I mean about the will. Sometimes there are complications. What kind of complication? Well, sometimes people make multiple wills, or there are codicils, amendments that change the original terms. It wouldn't hurt to ask a few questions. I thought about her suggestion for days before I finally worked up the courage to call Mr. Morrison's office. Chapter 4: The decision that pulled me away forever. Mr. Morrison agreed to see me on a Thursday afternoon. I'd taken leave from the base, telling my commanding officer I needed to handle some family business, which was true even if I wasn't sure exactly what that business was yet. His office was all dark wood and leather-bound books, the kind of place where important decisions were made by people who'd never wondered where their next meal was coming from. He offered me coffee, which I declined, and gestured for me to sit in one of the chairs across from his massive desk. What can I do for you, Miss Morgan? I wanted to ask about my grandfather's will, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, not because I'm contesting anything, but because something feels incomplete. Mr. Morrison's expression didn't change, but I noticed him shift slightly in his chair. Incomplete how? My grandfather was a meticulous man. He kept detailed records of everything, planned everything in advance. The will that was read, it felt rushed somehow, like it wasn't finished. Miss Morgan, I can assure you that the will we read was properly executed and witnessed according to Ohio state law. Your grandfather signed it in the presence of 2 witnesses just 3 months before his death. 3 months? That surprised me. But he'd been talking about updating his will for years. Why would he wait so long? Something flickered across Mr. Morrison's face, a hesitation so brief I almost missed it. Estate planning is a complex process, he said carefully. People often make multiple drafts before settling on final terms. The way he emphasized final made my heart race. Multiple drafts. Sarah's words came back to me. Sometimes people make multiple wills. Mr. Morrison, I said, leaning forward slightly, was there another version, another draft? He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, more human. Miss Morgan, I think there are some things about your grandfather's final wishes that you should know, but I need to speak with my partner first. Can you come back tomorrow afternoon? I left his office with more questions than answers, but for the first time since Grandpa's death, I felt like I was moving toward truth instead of away from it. Chapter 5: Coming back wasn't the plan, but I came back. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the look in Mr. Morrison's eyes, the careful way he'd chosen his words. By morning I'd convinced myself I was reading too much into things, that I was just a grieving granddaughter looking for meaning where none existed, but I went back anyway. This time, Mr. Morrison wasn't alone. With him was a younger man who introduced himself as David Chen, a junior partner at the firm. They both looked like they'd spent the night wrestling with a difficult decision. Miss Morgan, Morrison began, what I'm about to tell you must remain completely confidential until we determine the proper course of action. I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. Your grandfather did indeed create multiple versions of his will. The document we read last week was signed and witnessed properly, making it legally valid. But there was another will, signed just 2 weeks before his death. My heart stopped. Another will. David Chen opened a file folder and removed a document I'd never seen before. This second will contains very different instructions for the distribution of your grandfather's estate. Why wasn't it read with the first one? The two lawyers exchanged glances. Mr. Morrison cleared his throat. Because your grandfather gave us very specific instructions about this document. He said it should only be revealed if someone in the family asked the right questions. What kind of questions? Questions about his true intentions. About whether his final wishes were being honored properly. About whether anyone cared enough to look deeper than the surface. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. And you think my coming here yesterday was asking the right questions? Your grandfather was very specific about you, Miss Morgan. He said you had a soldier's instincts, that you'd know when something wasn't right. He believed that if anyone in the family would dig deeper, it would be you. David Chen slid the document across the desk toward me. This second will is quite different from the first, and according to our interpretation of your grandfather's instructions, the time has come for you to see it. Chapter 6. Everything was the same. Except me. Reading that second will was like discovering I'd been living in an alternate reality. In this version, I wasn't an afterthought who received books and pocket change. I was the primary beneficiary. The house, the investments, the jewelry collection, including Grandma Catherine's pearls. It all came to me. The family members who'd inherited everything in the first will were reduced to small monetary gifts. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. Attached to the will was a letter addressed to me in Grandpa's careful handwriting. My dear Rachel, if you're reading this, it means you've done exactly what I hoped you would. You've questioned what others accepted without thought. You've looked deeper when everyone else was satisfied with the surface. I've watched our family treat you as an outsider for choosing a path they didn't understand. They've made you feel unwelcome in your own home, unwanted at your own table. But you are the one who embodies the values that built this family's wealth and reputation. Honor, courage, service to something greater than yourself. The first will was my test. I wanted to see how the family would treat you when they thought you had nothing. I wanted to see if you would fight for what was rightfully yours, or if you would accept their judgment of your work. You came back, Rachel. You asked questions. You refused to simply accept that you didn't matter. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. The second will is my true final testament. Everything I've built, everything our family has accumulated over 3 generations, should go to someone who will use it wisely and honor the values it represents. I trust you to do the right thing, whatever that means to you. With all my love and respect, Grandpa William. I read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. My grandfather had orchestrated all of this. The funeral, the first will reading, my family's treatment of me, as an elaborate test. How is this possible? I asked. How can there be 2 valid wills? Mr. Morrison leaned back in his chair. Legally, the most recent will supersedes all previous versions. The second will is dated 2 weeks after the first, making it your grandfather's final testament. However, he gave us very specific instructions about when and how to reveal it. What happens now? That depends on you, Miss Morgan. We can file the second will with the probate court, which will invalidate the first one. Or, he paused, studying my face. You can decide that the first will should stand as your grandfather's final wishes. The choice was mine. I could claim everything my family thought they'd inherited, or I could walk away and let them keep what they believed was rightfully theirs. Chapter 7. The silence revealed what was missing. I asked for time to think, and they gave me the weekend. I drove home in a daze, the second will burning like a secret in my passenger seat. That night, I called Madison. Rachel. She sounded surprised to hear from me. How are you holding up? I wanted to ask you something, I said. Do you remember the stories Grandpa used to tell us about Grandma Catherine's pearls? There was a pause. Stories about how she wore them when she was a nurse during the war, how she met Grandpa at a USO dance while wearing them, how they were a symbol of service and sacrifice. Oh, those stories, Madison said with a small laugh. Rachel, those were just fairy tales he made up to entertain us when we were children. The pearls are just jewelry. Beautiful jewelry, but just jewelry. Just jewelry. I thought about my grandmother, who'd worn those pearls with such pride. About my grandfather, who'd told me those fairy tales with tears in his eyes. About the values my family had forgotten while they counted their inheritance. Madison, I said carefully, what are you planning to do with Grandpa's memory box? Memory box? The wooden box with his war photographs and letters. I saw you take it from the house. Another pause. Longer this time. Oh, that old thing. I haven't really thought about it. It's just a bunch of old papers and pictures that don't mean anything to anyone anymore. Don't mean anything to anyone anymore. I hung up without saying goodbye. Chapter 8. She thought no one would remember. Monday morning. I called Mr. Morrison and told him my decision. By Wednesday, the second will had been filed with the probate court. By Friday, the legal notices had been published in the local newspaper. The phone calls started that weekend. Uncle Richard was the first. Rachel, there's been some kind of mistake with the probate filing. You need to come down to the courthouse with us and straighten this out. Then Aunt Patricia, this is obviously a forgery, dear. Your grandfather would never have. Then Madison, Rachel, I don't understand. Why would you do this to us? I didn't answer any of their calls. Instead, I drove to the house, my house now according to the second will, and let myself in with the key Mr. Morrison had given me. Everything was exactly as I remembered, but somehow different. I walked through the rooms where I'd felt so unwelcome just weeks before, seeing them now through my grandfather's eyes. This wasn't just a house full of expensive things. It was a repository of family history, of values and traditions that had been forgotten in the rush to claim material wealth. I found Grandpa's study exactly as he'd left it, his military history books still arranged by chronological order on the shelves. There was a gap where several books were missing, the ones that had been left to me in the first will. Even in his elaborate test, he'd made sure I received something meaningful. On his desk was a small framed photograph I'd never noticed before. Grandma Catherine in her nurse's uniform, wearing the pearls, standing next to a young soldier, who would become my grandfather. On the back someone had written, "True love finds a way. June 1943. Just jewelry. Just old papers and pictures that don't mean anything to anyone anymore." That's when I knew what I had to do. Chapter 9. A letter. A phrase. A period. The family meeting was held the following Tuesday in Mr. Morrison's conference room. Everyone was there. Uncle Richard and Aunt Patricia, Madison and Brad, several cousins I barely knew, and their respective lawyers. The air was thick with tension and barely contained anger. I arrived last, carrying a manila envelope and wearing the same navy dress uniform I'd worn to the funeral. This time, I wore it as armor. "Rachel," Uncle Richard began before I'd even taken my seat, "we need to discuss this situation reasonably. Clearly, there's been some kind of before anyone says anything else." I interrupted, placing the envelope on the table. "I want you all to read something." I distributed copies of Grandpa's letter, watching their faces as they absorbed his words. The room grew progressively quieter as the reality of the situation sank in. Madison was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "He planned all of this. Every detail," I confirmed. "The first will, the way you all treated me at the funeral, the reading. Everything. It was a test to see what kind of people you really were." "That's manipulative," Aunt Patricia said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It was honest," I replied. "For the first time in years, our family was completely honest. You showed me exactly how much I mattered to you when you thought I had nothing to gain. And I learned something important about myself too." Uncle Richard's lawyer leaned forward. "Miss Morgan, what are your intentions regarding the estate?" I opened the envelope and removed a single sheet of paper, my own letter, handwritten the night before. "I'm keeping the house," I said. "It belongs with someone who understands its history. I'm keeping the photographs and letters and all the family memories that some of you think don't mean anything anymore." Madison's face had gone pale. "And everything else, the investments, the cash assets, the jewelry collection. I'm redistributing them according to the first will, with one condition." I paused, looking around the table at faces that showed confusion, relief, and something that might have been shame. "Grandma Catherine's pearls come back to me, not because they're valuable, but because I'm the only one in this room who remembers what they actually represent." Chapter 10. The choice I made with a heart at peace. The legal proceedings took 6 weeks to complete. During that time, I moved into Grandpa's house and began the slow process of learning what I'd inherited beyond money and property. I found journals he'd kept during the war, letters from my grandmother that revealed a love story more beautiful than any fairy tale. I discovered that he'd been quietly supporting several military charities for decades, including a scholarship fund for women entering service. Most importantly, I found a second letter, this one sealed and marked for Rachel. "When she's ready. My dear granddaughter, I hope my test hasn't caused you too much pain. I needed to know that our family's legacy would continue with someone who understood what it truly means. You have a choice now. You can use your inheritance to build bridges back to the family, or you can build something entirely new. Both paths have their merits. Whatever you choose, remember that wealth without character is worthless, and character without compassion is empty. You have both, Rachel. Use them wisely. All my love, Grandpa William. The day the estate was finally settled, Madison came to the house. She stood on the front porch where we used to play as children, looking smaller somehow than I remember. I brought these back, she, holding out a small jewelry box. The pearls lay nestled inside, gleaming softly in the afternoon light. Madison, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She looked up at me with eyes that were red-rimmed but clear. I read Grandpa's letter about 50 times. I remember the stories now, about Grandma Catherine and the pearls and what they meant. I just forgot. I took the jewelry box, feeling the weight of history in my hands. We all forgot, Madison continued. Forgot that you were the one who visited him every month when the rest of us were too busy. Forgot that you were the one who chose service over comfort. Forgot that you were the one who actually listened to his stories. We stood there in silence for a moment, two women trying to find their way back to the children they'd once been. I don't know how to fix this, she said finally. Maybe it doesn't need to be fixed, I replied. Maybe it just needs to be different. 3 months later, I established the Catherine Morgan Foundation, dedicated to supporting military families and preserving family histories that might otherwise be lost. Madison was the first person to volunteer. The house is full again now, not with expensive things collecting dust, but with the voices of young veterans attending workshops, military spouses finding community, children learning about the price of freedom. And every Sunday I wear Grandma Catherine's pearls to the Foundation's weekly dinner, where anyone in uniform eats for free, because some traditions are worth preserving, and some stories are too important to forget. My grandfather was right about one thing. True love finds a way. Sometimes it just takes a little longer than we expect.